Hi everyone, Hirsch Saha here, reporting from Auckland, and today is the 20th of May 2024. And geez, I'm just thinking it's my third video, well, my third video of today, and man, I really need to replace that horrible background. I think I won't use this room again because, well, I'm still at work. As you can probably tell, it's not home. It's just a regular, boring old office, and oh my God, there's like a broom over there, and just ugly filing cabinet and printing machine, another desk there. But anyway, yeah, I think I'll keep in mind not to use that such an ugly background ever again. I mean, although I probably don't help it much myself, but yeah, I'll try to use a better background next time. Sorry about that. But onto this talk video. Yeah, so I know it might sound like a joke, but asking the question in the end, who got on top? Who took over the world? And of course it's very arguable historically, but sort of just if you look at history, and I know I'm very much into sort of 20th century history. I know I've touched on it a lot in my previous talk videos. I'm very into it. I'm very fascinated by it, and I do, well, I think I'm quite knowledgeable about it. Let's just hope, for the good of all of us, that I actually am. But again, touching on 20th century history as well as centuries before that, if you look at history going back, a lot of what's very interesting is that a lot of countries, if they were given the chance to, a lot of countries or nations or civilizations, empires, when they were given the chance to basically take over the world, they jumped at it. They really did. You know, if you like going back, you had the United States, who was basically more or less on top from roughly, say, 1950 to 2000, being the wealthiest country in the world. And of course, in 2000, things started to go on a bit of a demise with, it might sound like a joke again, but with, of course, the election of George Bush Jr. and all the damage he did, and, the so called war on terrorism and trying to get rid of trying to eradicate weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East, and the invasion of Iraq in March 2003. I actually remember that, and what have you, all those sorts of things. And then of course things got even worse with the 2008 global financial crisis, which originated from the United States and really hit um, pretty much the rest of the Western world very hard. But if you look at it from approximately 1950 to 2000, the United States was basically on top, the wealthiest country in the world, most powerful country in the world, and the most influential, especially sort of from 1950 onwards, yes, when they had more or less, um, recovered from World War II. But if you look back, obviously you had the German horrible German Nazi Empire who tried to take over the world. And I've always found that very interesting. And many historians actually believe and agree that one of the fundamental mistakes Hitler made was that he invaded Russia with his Operation Barbarossa, which I think he created in, I think it was 1941. And then the invasion took place shortly afterwards, and he actually had a anti-aggression pact with Russia or the Soviet Union at the time. And he invaded in the winter. His troops suffered a horrible winter, which slowed them down, and they made some mistakes which the Soviets or the Russians really took advantage of. And in the end, the Russians beat them and took over their territory, more or less, which was basically Eastern Europe and all the way back up to Berlin. Um, but some historians actually think that had he not invaded Russia, he could have prolonged his empire and possibly even been successful. Some historians believe had he just invaded Russia in the summer as opposed to the winter, that could have even made all the difference. And to think what the world would be like today if Hitler had succeeded, it would obviously be a very, very different world. Um, so you had the Nazi Empire, and of course, at the time and afterwards, you had the Soviet Union itself. After World War II, it was basically a two-horse race with the two superpowers being the United States and the Soviet Union, and they always tried to beat each other. They tried to beat each other in terms of strength, wealth, war. When you had the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, the Vietnam War, 1957 to 1975, and then of course the space race itself, trying to beat each other with technology, the so-called race to the moon, which I detailed in another talk video before, called the Law of Space, Part One and Two. But the point really is that you look at virtually every nation or civilization in the past that had the chance to take over the rest of the world. They really jumped at it. They really did. It's a bit like an individual who's given the chance to become rich or become a millionaire. You can bet your bottom dollar, so to speak, that he or she would jump at that chance. So we had the Soviet Union, the United States, going back, Nazi Germany. Before then, there was, of course, Britain with all of its colonialization into going back to the 1800s, 1700s. Yeah, 18 and 1700s, especially with all the colonization and colonialism and taking over, a lot of countries, such as they had at one point they had the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some of the Pacific Islands like Fiji, India, or the entire Indian subcontinent, South Africa. At one point, they really had quite a lot, didn't they? So there was the British, and going even further back, there were before them were the Spanish. So many countries, that had the chance to take over the whole world really jumped at it. Whether they succeeded or failed is another story, but they really jumped at it if they had the chance. But what is very interesting, if you go back even further in history, if you go back about 5,000 years, approximately 5,000 years, to the time when it was actually the people in the Indus Valley, what is now, of course, India, and India was named after that term, Indus Valley. What is now India, and more specifically, what is northwestern India, or the state of India called Gujarat, and with its capital of course, Bombay, Mumbai, whatever you want to call it, which of course has today Bollywood. But and that's why they call it Bollywood. It's basically the Indian version of Hollywood, but with a B in front because it comes from the name of that city, Bombay, beginning with a B. But what's really interesting about approximately 5,000 years ago, we would probably never know the exact number and might be out by a few hundred years either side, but approximately 5,000 years ago, it was the people in the Indus Valley, in that part of India who were actually the wealthiest and most advanced in the world. They were very, they had a lot of riches. They had a proper civilization going, buildings, roads, all that. They even had sewage systems, and not only were they the most advanced technologically and the wealthiest in the world at the time, they were actually a very peaceful, loving people, and they were quite happy with what they had. They didn't really see the need to, if you like, take over other lands or to just take over the whole world, the whole planet as a whole. So I just hope the brightness on this thing is not so bad. I apologize if it is. But yeah, the people of the Indus Valley about 5,000 years ago were quite happy, quite content with what they had. They didn't really see the need to just take over the rest of the world. And some historians argue that if they did, or if they tried to, they may have very well have actually succeeded because the rest of the world was quite behind. Europe was basically consisting of savages and all that. This is before North America was colonized. Well, before it was colonized by the British colonials. At the time, they would have had the Native Indians there, or what were later on referred to as Native Indians, when, of course, Christopher Columbus discovered America in the 1700s, and he thought he had actually landed in India, but he was in America, and that's why he called the natives there Indians, because he thought they were true Indians, and they're still referred to as Native Indians or American Indians today. But they would have supposedly had been at that time in North America. But the Indus Valley people, didn't really see a need to do that. Quite interestingly, they were, again, I'll repeat, they were happy with what they had, and some historians argue that if they really wanted to, they could have actually, in fact, taken over the rest of the world. And I remember having this conversation with my father and thinking, wow, that really could have been something interesting. If, let's just say, like an alternative history sort of subject or proposition, an alternative history idea. Say, had they done that, and say, had they basically converted the entire planet into, say, one gigantic India. And I remember saying to my dad, geez, imagine that. It's like, Indian restaurants on every corner, a Lord Shiva statue in every suburb, all the, nightclubs blasting Bhangra, and everyone sipping mango lassis instead of, say, coffee, or Coke, certainly make a good movie, wouldn't it? Or make a good movie, make a great book as well. But it's interesting to think that could have actually have been a possibility. But one thing I always found quite fascinating with the Indus Valley people is that, again, they really didn't see the need to do that. They were happy with what they had, and that really is something that stands out because when you look at it, like I said, a lot of different races, countries, nations, empires when they had the chance to take over the world, they jumped at it. Whether they succeeded or not is another story. But the Indus Valley people, the people of ancient India, if you like, were basically an exception to that. They really didn't see the need to do that. And it's quite interesting. Even today, it continues in many ways. Even to this day, India, the only country to have never waged war on any other country, such a peaceful country in that respect. Even today, they've got if I'm correct, they've got the third strongest army in the world, after that of the United States and China. But still, no one really fears India, if you know what I mean. A lot of superpowers, such as, the United States, China, Britain, even Japan and Russia, if you like, a lot of those sort of superpowers are sort of feared in some way or a potential threat in some way. Obviously, the United States and China with their vast armies and military, for example. But even though India does have a vast army itself, it's not feared. No one fears India, but for the right reasons. Because India is really not seen as a threat to anyone. It doesn't want to invade anyone. It doesn't want to take over or wipe out anyone. Um, I could only see India using its army for defense if someone else happened to invade them or try to invade them, wanted to invade them. But other than that, it's amazing that sort of still continues through today. And even if you go to a country like India, a lot of non-Indians or even Westerners are very welcomed there. They are very, very welcomed, and the Indians really look up to them and they respect them, as opposed to, say, looking down on them or just, not liking them. And it's actually a bit surprising, especially when you consider the history, right? But no, I think that's amazing. India is a very welcoming country. They say some of the happiest people in the world are in India. And hey, it might have been the top of the world until, of course, British invasion, and a lot of damage was unfortunately done to the country. But hey, yeah, only about 70 or so years after independence, or about more like probably about 80 years after independence now, close to that. And, as we all hear, it's an upcoming superpower, the third wealthiest country on the planet, the fastest growing country on the planet with a very young population, a huge workforce, very hardworking people, very disciplined people, and even a country with a space race. You may remember that India sent its third probe to the moon just last August, being August 2023, known as Chandrayaan 3. Chandrayaan, which is Indian for moon vehicle, and they've sent two probes there before. I think it was the second one that crashed, but the first one landed successfully, and they've sent also a probe to Mars as well. And I think that reached the planet Mars in about 2015. So it's quite interesting when you look at a country like India, and but although coming back to today, another thought I had on this, and I guess answering the actual question of this talk video, you know, in the end, who made it to the top? Who took over the world? Well, of course, many tried to and didn't quite get there, or basically failed, you could say. But if you look at it today, there are definitely countries that might have not really, so to speak, taken over the world, but who definitely have a lot of influence and who are definitely present worldwide. The United States is, of course, one. Their culture are present everywhere, and they're very influential. From all sorts of products they produce. Whether it's IT or Hollywood movies. And of course you've got Britain as well with the English language. And all the countries they colonized, and people originally came from Britain that are now in many, many other places of the world. You've of course got China, which is an absolute superpower, very strong in many different ways. And then there's India. And one thing about China and India is that, you have Chinese and Indians just everywhere, no matter what country you're looking at, whether it's a country in Africa or South America or in the middle of the Pacific, chances are there's at least a few Chinese and Indian people there. Now China's population is a bit below 1.4 billion and India's is a bit above 1.4 billion as of November 2022, about a year and a half ago. It's India's population that has surpassed China's, and India is now the most populous country in the world. You could almost say the average person is basically Indian. Like they used to joke, the average person is basically Chinese. So one thing you could look at, maybe not so much taking over the world, or or winning or being on top, but there are certainly a few countries that have become very powerful, very wealthy, very advanced, and very influential, and those would basically be it. The United States, Britain, China, and India, which are just in so many places. And I remember actually talking to a close friend of mine, and he sort of, brought that idea out of me because I was actually telling him what I said earlier in this talk video about how a lot of different countries who tried to, take over the world jumped at the chance, whereas ancient India or the people of the Indus Valley about 5,000 years ago didn't. And he was saying, he actually said to me, well, if you look at it, countries like China and India basically done it, because they're just everywhere. They're just everywhere. I mean, what suburb doesn't have a Chinese restaurant and an Indian restaurant? And of course, people who are Chinese and Indian. So he put that idea onto me, and I thought it was very interesting. And I sort of expanded on it, saying, yeah, if you really look at it, basically those four nations, Britain, the United States, China, and India, pretty much more or less at the top, very advanced, very strong, very wealthy, and certainly very influential. So in some ways, at the end of the day, they are the ones that, if you like, in those ways, made it to the top. Not really took over the world, probably that's for the better, but certainly made it to the top and are very influential in virtually everything, we see and do and experience today. So at least, hey, something to think about, something to remember as well. Thank you.